I'm gonna go wrangle some folks up.
I haven't been able to get into my emails. I should share emails asking any questions.
Okay. Good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Is this because of password reset stuff?
Well, kind of, yeah. And then after they reset it, then they said, like I'm partially, when they're just like I partially went through, but not all the way. Like I.
We're gonna switch it out of order a little bit. We're gonna have the mayor and the chief come up.
Shaker. Like, and we'll see how it goes.
You ready? All right. There's Marcia. All right, we are going to call our January PCCEP meeting to order. Want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Want to thank NARA Wellness Center for hosting us in this space. Tonight's dinner has been provided by a food cart known as Pastas. They also have a business called Soup Cooler, so we want to thank them. They're on Vancouver and Fremont. The owner's name is Marcus Branch. I'd just like us to go down the row for those of us who are at our microphones right now and just introduce yourselves. I'm Lakiana Drury, co-chair of PCCEP, and we'll just go to my right and then come back down here to the left.
Andrew Calick, co-chair.
Yolanda Salguero, co-chair for the youth subcommittee.
Britt Masbach, also youth co-chair.
Steve Trujillo. Patrick Nolan.
Amy Anderson, PCCEP member.
Elliot Young, steering committee alternate.
Good morning, Marcia Perez with the Race and Equity meeting.
And two absences today, Lakeisha and Vadim. We want to recognize a couple folks here with us today, elected officials and leaders, Mayor Ted Wheeler and newly elected Police Chief Resch, both of whom...
She wishes she was elected, I'm sure. Recently appointed. Congratulations, Chief. In a position of power without going to the ballot. The best way to do it.
We're going to hear from both of them in a moment. We are going to start with our honorary moment of silence. A lot of things happening in the city right now. We'll talk later on about the substantial compliance decision that was just announced. Obviously, the decision not to charge an officer in the death related to Coben Henriksen, and also the recent passing of NBA legend Kobe Bryant. So what we have over here with Elliot, we have a couple candles lit and some slips of paper. And if you would like to write someone's name on there that you would like to have remembered, we're going to host a moment of silence after people have had a chance to come up and write names on there. There's been a generous offer from a community member to enhance our box, so next month you'll see a slightly more decorative, meaningful box to that, and so we want to thank her for that. So at this time, I'll ask folks if they would like to come up and write a name on that paper in that box. It does remain anonymous, and then we'll host a moment of silence following that. Okay, we're going to observe a 30-second moment of silence for all the names that were posted in there and those who were not as well. Thank you. I'm going to call up Theo Lata, our project manager, program manager, for a land acknowledgement, and then we're going to hear from our city leaders. If someone could turn this microphone on, please.
Hello. Oh, hello. My name is Theo Latta. I'm the PCCEP project director. I'm not going to do a land acknowledgement necessarily. I'm just here to note that we're at NARA. For those of you who don't know, it stands for the Native American Rehabilitation Association, and I'm honored to be back here. I've spent a lot of time working here, and I used to get my flu shots just right upstairs. So I thank you all for sharing this space, and NARA is an organization that serves Indigenous people, and I just want to let people know, and you already know, that this is Indigenous land, and people who are Indigenous are still here and still thriving, and still people that are involved in the Portland community. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Theo. Next, I'm going to call up Mayor Ted Wheeler for his remarks, and thank you again for being here tonight. Yep.
Thank you again for your service. I appreciate it. It's not easy, but it's most appreciated. And I also want to acknowledge the passing of another individual who has not been mentioned yet, and that is my friend and colleague, former Commissioner Nick Fish. And he cheered you on and was very appreciative of your service to the community. So I want to acknowledge him and his good work in the community and his appreciation for the work that you are all doing. First of all, I'm grateful for the work that you have done, and I'm thankful for the efforts that you'll put in the months and the years ahead. The mission, of course, of the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing is to work closely with my office, the Portland Police Bureau, and the community to achieve desired outcomes of equitable policing above constitutional requirements, and also to engage in meaningful community dialogue and build trust in the Portland Police Bureau. PCCEP's charge is to provide recommendations and advice to me as the mayor, and also recommendations to the Portland Police Bureau on community engagement and policy improvements. PCCEP's mission is also to build trust between the Portland Police Bureau and communities of color, people living with mental illness, and all historically marginalized groups that have encountered barriers to encouraging and building trust. You're independent. I think that is becoming crystal clear to people in the community. You'll recall that when we created this committee, there was a lot of questions about my level of influence on this committee. I think you have clearly established your independence, which is just what I had hoped that you would do. You can help me as mayor better understand and engage with the community on public safety issues that impact both legitimacy and trust in the community. As you know, on Friday of last week, and Lakiana mentioned this briefly, the city received a letter from the United States Department of Justice indicating that the Portland Police Bureau has achieved what is called substantial compliance with the terms of the DOJ settlement agreement. This accomplishment represents the city taking specific, concrete steps to address community concerns about interactions with people in mental health crisis, use of force, training, supervision, management, and accountability. I want to be clear. My vision for the Portland Police Bureau has been consistently to strengthen and enhance the Bureau, to encourage it to be more reflective of the community it serves, and to make it more accountable to the community that it serves. While substantial compliance does not end our work, it represents a major milestone on the path towards increasing accountability. Among other things, the Portland Police Bureau has revised its force policies, improved its force training, and implemented rigorous after-action supervisory review. The Portland Police Bureau has increased the number of supervisors on street and increased supervisor training. The Portland Police Bureau created the Behavioral Health Unit and expanded the Behavioral Health Unit mobile teams to 5. They proactively addressed accountability by creating new systems to audit all uses of force and to track other performance dimensions as well. And as you know, at my direction, PCCEP was created. I appreciate the work that you've all done, actively pursuing efforts to increase both outreach in the community and engagement in the community. Even with all these changes, I wanted to underscore an important point. Our work is not done. Our work is not done. We need to collectively provide more services and support to people experiencing mental illness, and we need to continue to explore ways to reduce uses of force, including deadly force. We also know that we have work to do to address racial disparities in the criminal justice system. I want you to know that I am personally committed, the city is committed, and the Portland Police Bureau is committed to doing that work. After achieving this milestone, I'm also very hopeful that Judge Simon supports final approval of the amendments to Section 9 of the Settlement Agreement on Community Engagement. We have a great structure in place, and PCCEP has done excellent work as the compliance officer is recognized in finding substantial compliance with that particular section of the settlement agreement. The last year has brought significant progress on the part of the Portland Police Bureau, but I want to underscore again, there is more work to be done. I want to reassure you that I am fully committed to PCCEP both now and in the future. As I've said, I need your help with community engagement and trust building in the community and the Portland Police Bureau. And as I have said, my expectation is that PCCEP continues on after the settlement agreement goes away. I think it is very important, it's vitally important that we continue to maintain PCCEP. The focus of the settlement agreement is on policing related to people in mental health crisis and experiencing mental illness and police use of force. That focus remains important, but there are other broader and equally critical issues that need to be addressed that are beyond the scope of the settlement agreement. The work of PCCEP is vital, and it has just begun. I want to tell you that you will have my continued support. I will continue to make sure that you get whatever resources and support you need from my office, from the Portland Police Bureau, and from the city to help you be as effective as possible as you can be in your work. So thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mayor Wheeler, for being here and for your commitment to PCCEP. And we look forward to working with you in the coming months to make sure that happens as the settlement agreement closes out and whatnot. Next, I'd like to welcome new Chief Resch up for some comments as well. She was just recently appointed to the position by Mayor Wheeler. Yeah.
I'll try to stand over here so maybe everybody can can see, and I'm not turning around in circles. So thank you for having me here this evening. I've been to a couple other PCCEP meetings, but obviously this is the first one in this capacity as the Chief of Police. So I just wanted to take a few moments. I had the opportunity, I think it was a couple weeks ago, that there were a couple of the PCCEP members on OPB doing an interview, and so I thought this would be a good time maybe to take a moment to answer some of the questions that you all asked during that interview, and then I thought that would be a good starting point for our future conversations. So one of the first, and I kind of wrote them down as we went along, so if you see me glancing, that's kind of what I'm doing, is I wanted to reassure you, because one of the questions you had was, will there still be real commitment from the Portland Police Bureau? And yes, there absolutely will be. There will not be a change in the commitment that the Portland Police Bureau has with working with the PCCEP and the things that you're already working on, the things that you're thinking about working on, and continuing that movement forward. I commit to going forward to working for real substantial change. As the mayor mentioned, yes, we did get substantial compliance, but you'll hear me say this over and over again. There is no finish line to police work. Police work is ever evolving. It's very different than when I was hired 20 years ago, and it will be very different from 20 years now. And that's because we're tasked with policing with how our community expects us to police. And that's going to be ever changing as our community changes. I really appreciate you saying that now Commissioner Outlaw was very much supported by the PCCEP and by the community of the city of Portland. I believe she was, and I appreciate that, and I am looking forward to gaining just as much support. I have been with the Police Bureau almost 21 years. It will be 21 years on February 15th. I've done a variety of things throughout my career, and as I get an opportunity to interact with folks more, I don't want to take all this time right now to tell you about my 21-year history in the Bureau, but I've done a lot of things in different various specialty units and held just about every rank that you can have in the Bureau. So as I interact with the community, I'd love to share more stories about that with you. I did agree when you spoke about the continued need for review when it comes to the use of force for the Portland Police Bureau, but I also want to stress that I don't feel like it needs to be just a Portland Police Bureau review. I think there's a lot of other city bureaus, different agencies, different services, and different resources that we can look to a review of them to see how they can also assist in our use of force up to and including our officer-involved shootings. I am very interested in learning from the community how they feel that we can help reduce the gun violence that's occurring in the city of Portland right now. We have an outstanding gun violence reduction team. There will be a work session for that on February 6th that I believe will be live streamed. So if you are interested in watching that and learning more about our team. But I'm also very interested in learning how communities like this feel that they can help us positively impact this gun violence that's occurring right now. One of the most important questions that you asked, and one that I would love to work on, is how do we build trust? And how do we, I always want to say strengthen trust. I don't feel like we need to be absolutely rebuilding trust, because I don't believe we are at the ground floor of that. I think we have done a really good job of building trust in this community, and we need to strengthen the trust that we have built. Trust is a very, very personal thing, and it's very difficult when you meet one officer. Like I just met some folks over here at the table today, and we've had our first interaction. I feel like I've taken one baby step toward gaining, trust with the folks that I met here tonight. The problem comes when another officer comes behind me, and it's almost like we have to rebuild that bridge over and over again. And I've said this in a couple other meetings, and I don't mean it to sound, I can't think of a better word, but cheesy, is it's difficult, and what I'm looking for is how do I build a bridge that I can walk over of trust where other officers can walk behind me without having to rebuild the same bridge? Because there are thousands and thousands of Portlanders and only hundreds of police officers. And so we need to be able to find ways that we can learn to trust each other, that those bridges don't have to be rebuilt, but they can be shared. So that's going to be something that I'm really looking forward to working with especially this group, and because I feel this group is very engaging, and as I've said in a couple of other press conferences that I've had so far, that's my ask to the community, is to engage with us us as often as you can. I'm also interested in what you all feel is actually a success. So when it comes to like the DOJ compliance, what do you feel would be success? I know what I think success is. I know what the Police Bureau would think is success because I look at it through a police lens. But what does the community consider a success? And then also, I get asked a lot, how can we help? And of course, my answer to that is always to help us advocate, help us look for additional resources that we can offer to folks that we come into contact with that maybe not need police resources, but are in desperate need of other resources. Help advocate for those. So I hope I've touched on a few things. I don't want to take up too much time. I look forward to meeting all of you and working with you moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you for listening. We got feedback. We weren't expecting feedback from the chief.
Yeah, right.
Got to be careful what we say on the radio from now on. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Also glad to see you here at another meeting after being chief. You were at previous meetings, as you mentioned before, so appreciate still showing up. We're now going to move into our subcommittee reports. Just asking that all the chairs keep their succinct, just knowing that we've got a lot to cover today. I know there's also going to be questions, just to give audience members some heads up that there will be time to discuss the substantial compliance. We did build that into tonight's meeting, so stay tuned for that. We're going to start with the youth subcommittee. Yolanda and Britt, if you want to give your report.
Certainly, I'll get started. First, an update on the survey we've been working on to implement across PPS schools to gauge interest and opinions on SROs in schools. We finally submitted the materials to the IRB. Forget what that stands for, but the board that will be reviewing the materials and then eventually approving it so that we can implement it school-wide. So we've submitted those materials, and then we're also continuing to work on the survey, and as well as finding other opportunities to meet with young people to get their opinions. And Yolanda will mention other ways we're doing that.
As some of you may recall, we have folks, youth from McLaren Correctional Facility, who are participating with feedback. And then we were asked if we would implement a survey at McLaren to get their feedback regarding police. However, as many of you know, we probably have to go through a few channels. So we reached out to the first name that we were given, their administrative team over there. And so I'm waiting for a response. But that's kind of where we are right now. And so if that relationship is able to go forward, then we'll implement a survey at McLaren and also talk to their youth.
Yeah, so an update on the timeline. Our plan is to release the survey in the spring. We're aiming for March. We'll see if we get it improved in time. And so that would mean that we'd be able to get this out before the end of the school year, and then we'd be able to come back together and maybe work with a statistician or someone else who would be able to help us break down the numbers and break down the responses, and then come up with some sort of presentation that we can share back with people.
Thank you both for that report. Really proud of the work y'all are doing on that. We're going to go next to Patrick with subcommittee with people with mental illness.
Hi, yeah. We met on January 13th at the Garlington Cascadia Health Center, and we discussed homelessness and traumatic brain injuries at our meeting. And we decided that at our next meeting we would have the Brain Injury Alliance of Oregon come and visit us to discuss traumatic brain injuries. After that, we discussed the status conference and decided that we would have a joint statement, and that we would also have 2 or 3 members of our subcommittee appear to testify. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that report. I'm going to turn it over to Marcia for the racial equity subcommittee report.
Thank you. We last met on January 16th. We did quite a few things which were pretty exciting. We were able to finalize our mission statement. We finalized a name change, which is now changed to the Racial Equity Subcommittee. We were able to finalize a leadership nomination. I will now be chairing the subcommittee. So I appreciate all the support in that. We talked about different community outreach efforts and the procedural justice statement policy recommendation that we'll be discussing this evening. As we were working through that, I think we came up with a pretty exciting idea on how to secure future recommendations, which would enhance our collaboration with the policy making staff in the Portland Police Bureau. And then we are doing some strategic planning to include future forecasting of goals that we want to accomplish for community engagement, and thinking really strategically on how we want to engage communities of color, marginalized communities that may not be able to just come to the PCCEP office all the time. So it's a pretty good meeting. We'll be meeting again on the 20th of February from 5:30 to 7.
And that's reoccurring the third Thursday of the month.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. You can do the steering committee and then follow it up with the settlement agreement.
Sure. So steering committee met at our regularly scheduled time on the 13th. A couple items on our agenda. One was reporting back to the committee about a meeting that Lachian and I had with the mayor and Robert King, making sure that we sort of highlighted some of the key issues that were raised in that meeting and how we can continue to work together over the course of the year. One of the things that that sprung from that conversation and others that we've had is also the idea of PCEP having what amounts to a strategic plan for ourselves going forward. And so we solicited feedback both from committee members and also from the public about what they envision us doing and how we can do it more effectively, not only in the coming year, but going forward. And then the last item on the agenda was strategy for the February 25th court hearing. You'll hear more about this later this evening, but essentially we wanted to get our ducks in a row about how we as a committee should be approaching the court on the 25th, given the fact that the court will be considering whether to give final approval to the amendments to the agreement that created us in the first place. So that's an ongoing and continued effort that we have undertaken. That's the steering committee. The Settlement Agreement and Policy Subcommittee had a town hall on facial recognition technology this month. Thank you to everybody who attended that. We had great turnout, not only to listen to Commissioner Hardesty, who presented her view and her approach on the issue, but also to a number of community organizations that came and did the same. It was a terrific meeting and a great dialogue. They had an additional work session at council just this morning on this issue, and so things are moving ahead apace. I encourage all of you to take a look at that and get in touch with the council if you have opinions on it. It's certainly something that will remain on our agenda, and we hope to not only discuss it, but use the subcommittee as a forum for additional policy conversations of that type. If any of you all think that there's a specific policy issue that we should be tackling right now, please come up to me and let me know. And looks like the mayor might have one.
I had a thought. I was just speaking with the city folks who helped organize this morning's work session. Would you be interested in coordinating a community summit on the question of facial recognition technology? You could think on that and get back to it. But we're interested in doing that and broadening the conversation we had this morning.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We will talk about a steering committee because that is certainly something we want to do more of, creating convening spaces where folks can talk about key issues. So we'll get back to you on it. Thank you very much.
There was a request just to repeat the mayor's question, which I heard was, is PCEP interested in hosting or coordinating and hosting a town hall on facial recognition? Yes, and I think that would be something we would be open to doing. Just want to make sure that because we're like live streamed or whatnot, so just so folks back wherever they are can hear it. Right. Thank you on both those reports. I'm actually now going to turn it right back over to you for some very exciting new members.
Yeah, new members. We have a couple of great candidates who have applied to take their seat on this board. We are very grateful for that. I think one or more of them is here tonight. Is that right?
Correct.
Terrific. So if you all want to take a minute to introduce yourself, both to the folks present and also the people up here, we'll allow you to do that. There are biographies right in front of us for PCEP members. I think we had some in the back as well. And then after you make a statement about your interests and who you are, we will vote as a PCEP on who to recommend to the mayor that he appoint to the open seats. We have ballots up here. We will go through that process as efficiently as possible, and then we'll move the agenda.
Just want to clarify too, this is one of the seats is a open youth seat. There's 2 seats on PCEP that are specifically dedicated to youth ages, high school ages currently. And so we're filling one of those, but one of them is an open adult seat, but there's no stipulation that a youth could not sit in that seat, and we have 2 youth here tonight. So 2 of the 3 alternates are here. So we'll have both of y'all come up and speak, and then we can fill both of them in both the seats that are open today. So I'll recognize either one of you. I don't know who wants to come first.
Quick clarification, Lakiana. So you're saying that we could fill both seats, technically, theoretically, with youth? There's no requirement.
Correct.
For that?
There's 2 youth seats
Okay.
that are designated. I still consider myself young too, but a youth can also fill an adult seat. There's no there's nothing that prevents that. There just has to be 2 open youth seats, and one of them has been open for some time. And I want to thank Theo and Jared and the rest of the staff for really working to help get this together. So I'm going to invite Taji up to give some brief remarks.
I won't talk as studiously as Mayor Wheeler or anyone else, but hello everyone. Hello everyone. My name is Taji Chesimit. I am a current senior at De La Salle North Catholic High School in North Portland, and I'll be incoming freshman at University of Chicago next fall. I am currently an applicant for PCCEP, and I wanted to just share a little bit about myself to give you some ideas about that. I am currently one of the directors of a nonprofit that I started with one of my colleagues who sits on the committee called Youth Educating Police. And over the last 2 years, we've worked with the City of Portland and with the Portland Police Bureau in specific to elicit some training for the officers on youth interactions and youth engagement specifically, and really decreasing the animosity between young people and police officers. And we have a very focused community lens on that. Along with that, I also sat on the Committee 396, which focused on code change. And so we just finished up that process this last December. And we basically came to a conclusion on understanding where civic engagement is in the city of Portland, and really understanding my interest in this committee came a lot from working in offices with the city of Portland and PPB, along with working on 396, and really seeing the importance of having young people's voices, and my voice specifically, and my experience doing all of that on this committee would be vital and very intricate and super important. So I'm really hoping to be able to support the committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taji. Next, we're going to call up Jamari.
Hi, I'm Jamari Atherley. I'm a senior at Benson High School. I'm running for this position because I want to give a voice to the groups that are underrepresented. And this summer, I worked with Word is Bond, and we went to the police training facility and went through some of their trainings and witnessed some of their trainings. And I also helped write some recommendations that we presented to the mayor to help things that we think that would help Portland police better their practices. Outside of Word is Bond, I also box and help mentor the members of the gym and help train them. And at school, I know I'd hang out with and go to BSU a lot to help the kids that are also kids of color like me, that feel like they're not welcomed at school. And I just want to give a voice to them and have them want to be a part of this, and have them feel welcome to be a part of this whole group and everything.
Okay. And go. My bad.
All right, so any PCCEP comment about any of the candidates? Or questions, I suppose.
Yes, there was just a request by the staff for me for if you could read Tabibi's bio.
Oh, okay. So the biography of Tabiti Lewis is that he's an associate professor at Washington State University in Vancouver and the interim associate academic vice chancellor. He's a literary scholar whose work engages critical race theory and masculinity via sport culture. He is the author of Ballers of the New School, Race and Sport in America from 2010. Lewis has also produced 2 books about the life and fiction of feminist and black artist movement writer Toni Cade Bambara, Conversations with Toni Cade Bambara in 2012, and Black People Are My Business, Practices of Liberation in the Fiction of Toni Cade Bambara this year, 2020. His essays have also appeared in journals, newspapers, and magazines on topics ranging from literature, sport culture, and hip-hop to racism and social justice. I don't think the professor is with us tonight. He's come to previous meetings, but couldn't be here tonight.
Thank you.
Just point of clarification, is he an alternate right now or no?
Who is he?
Yes.
Yes, all 3 of them on this list are alternates.
Are alternates already. Okay.
They've all conducted interviews. The youth just conducted interviews in the last couple weeks. Yes, ma'am.
Amy?
Oh, sorry.
I just have one thought. I just want to push it past PCEP. I mean, I love everybody and everything they're doing. I heard the first gentleman say he was going to the University of Chicago in the fall. This is an extremely new and vibrant committee, and I have hesitation because the involvement and engagement that we need kind of needs to move on past a few months. The process of getting on PCEP takes a long time anyways. So my concerns about our commitment over time rather than just in the moment to fill a seat. I guess I don't want to say anything negatively because he's doing great work, but I am concerned about the longevity of his term if he's going to Chicago this fall rather than the following year. That's all.
I would just add, as a member of the youth subcommittee, I'm more interested in someone who's willing to do work with me and Britt. I'm not so concerned about them leaving in the fall.
Any other PCEP comment or questions?
No, other than they both sat on a panel with me in December on school resource officers and are both doing excellent work in the community. And I think they're both highly qualified too.
Hello, this is Theo again, PCEP Project Director. Just point of clarification, both youth have been through the interview process. They are not yet alternates. They would have to be appointed or voted on by you to become alternates. But since there is an open seat on the committee, then they could be voted on and put on the committee. Also, to Amy's question or comment, youth, specifically in the PCEP plan, they can elect to take 6-month terms because it was designed that way. So they can take 6-month terms if they so desire. It's really up to the youth whether they want to take 6-month or 1-year terms. But it's different for youth than it is for adult members. But like Lakiana said before, both there's 2 designated seats for youth members, but there's no maximum youth members, so it can be 3 if that's the way you all vote. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Theo. All right, any public comment or questions for our candidates?
We got Dan and Chief Resch, so I'm gonna. We can actually put this microphone back up over there now. So once you're done with it, if you just want to stick it, there's a stand right there.
I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch, and I have never heard before that there are terms that are 6 months. I didn't see that in the founding document, even when after the City Council amended it recently to make, and they redefined youth to be between college age as well as high school age. So there's a broader definition now of youth. So I think you sound like you have a great candidate, but turnover is one of the biggest problems in committees like this, where you can't have a through line of discussions that you've already had. And so related to that is the training that needs to be done. And my understanding is that every one of you and everybody, including the youth seats, has to go through training not only with the staff of the PCCEP, but with the police bureau itself. And I've participated through the AMA Coalition in doing some community training for members of this committee. So I'm not sure how all that's going to get done in time to seat these members before at least one of them has to leave for college.
Thank you.
Over there,
Chief.
My name is Joe Walsh. I represent Individuals for Justice. I look around this room and I see co-op. The panel and the committee makeup is pretty good. The audience sucks. If I was the chairperson of your committee, I would be in a panic. Because look around this room. You see a lot of white people. You see a lot of staff. You see a lot of politicians. Wheeler is a lot of politicians. You see the chief of police. And you see activists like me. We have agendas. Some good, some bad. But we have agendas. Activists do. What you want here is 200 like they had at the first co-op meeting. I don't know if any of you know that. There were 200 citizens attended the first meeting of co-op. There was 100 the second meeting, and there was 50 the third, and then it went to hell. Because the committee did not reach out. You cannot sit in here and be like the Titanic. You have to get out there. People are dying. People want to hear you. We have a national disgrace. We have a city disgrace. And we're all in here eating chocolate chip cookies. Think about that. I came here to see how you guys were doing because I was at your first meeting, if you remember. And now we're going to go before the judge and give our opinions. And I wanted to see what you're doing. What you're doing is honorable. But it's not what you're tasked to do. You're tasked to do is to be out there, not in here. And I have a request that I've made a number of times. When the police are in uniform, would they please check their guns someplace? It's very hard to criticize a police officer when they're standing in back of you with a loaded gun. So why not come in civvies? And why not leave your guns at home? Thank you for your courtesy.
You're welcome.
One thing, thank you, Mr. Walsh. You sort of put the nail on the head there in that we need to engage all communities in this city. And I'll be frank with you that we don't always know how to do that in an effective way. And we have been meeting with countless people. I know a lot of people, pretty much everybody at this table has been meeting with a lot of people outside these formal settings. And one of the things we ask is, how do we do this? Where do we go? How do we reach people? Because we have some ideas. We're members of the community, after all, but we don't have all ideas. And so to the extent that anybody in this room has thoughts about how we can better engage the community, not just so they come to these meetings, but more importantly, that they are engaged on the work, we are all ears to hearing them.
Think about the people that go on the entire city getting people to sign petitions. Their interaction is incredible. If you watch, like I watch in Gateway sometimes with people taking petitions and they talk to people and they tell them what's going on with this and would they sign and stuff like that, that's something you should think about. You know, what is it that I have that he wants or she wants? What is it? I have information. I have commitment. I have all those things. It's not rocket science. You come up to me and you say, hello, if you're friendly, hello, Joe, and start a conversation. That's how you reach people. You don't reach them in cocktail parties. And you don't reach them here. This has to happen. But I'm telling you, you're going to be like the Titanic. You will not be able to turn. It'll be too big, too clumsy. You're trying to do too much.
Okay, thank you, Chief. And I see some hands, so we'll
Yeah,
get to you
I'll be
folks.
really brief. I just wanted to thank the two youth that stood up and spoke. In my recent promotion, I've had to do a lot of public speaking relatively quickly, and I understand how difficult and intimidating that is, and I really appreciate you coming out, talking about all you've done to help the police and how you want to continue that. So I just wanted to thank you publicly that it's difficult to stand up here and basically try out for something, which is exactly what you just did. So I support you both, and I hope that you are continued successful, whether you're here or in Chicago, and thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you, Chief.
I think we have some more people wanting to speak.
Indeed, we do.
Form a line over here.
Have some comments. Why don't we? We'll form a line over here just so we don't have to move the mic around. So, come join.
Thank you.
Come on, be brave. I'll support you. Bravery, bravery. You can do it.
Hi, I'm Jared Hager with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I just wanted to comment on the candidates, and I really appreciate Dan's comment that continuity is important. And thinking long-term, in my view, and being at a lot of the subcommittee meetings, I think continuity is going to be established by successes, and that's going to take a lot of hard work. So in evaluating your candidates, I urge you to think about the work that can get done, and I appreciate Yolanda's comment that, you know, in the subcommittee of two and the hard work that you guys are doing in the youth subcommittee, you could use some vital energy. I think that's important for everyone to consider.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jose. I just want to make it super clear that everybody knows that Lakiana is actually putting in work with the youth and people of color. He's reaching out to everybody. The only reason I'm here is because he reached out to me and a bunch of my friends that are underrepresented. So I understand what you guys are saying, as in, like, this is a really white community, and like, I'm Chicano, so I can get a pass, you know? But like, you guys are really white. Like, no offense, but I'm saying, like, Lakiana's putting in a lot of work, and I want you guys to appreciate that, understand that it's not his fault that all these kids aren't showing up, but the fact is that he's giving them an invitation and an open door, and a lot of other people aren't, you know? I see probably 2 people on this board that I've ever seen actually put in work and actually reach out to communities of color, and they're the only 2 people of color on the board. So that's all I gotta say.
I just wanted to say, well, first of all, my name is Jay Zion. I'm a member of Word is Bond, and though I do get what you're saying by you don't see a lot of it reflected here, but I can speak for Lakiana Jury when I say that he is reaching people and helping me reach people and giving me a platform. Like one event with Lakiana, and it was less people than this, and I got 6, 7 people banging my line trying to get on with this. So it's not reflected as often as it should be, but it is happening and it is working, and we're going to get a lot better than this, a lot bigger turnout than this very soon.
My name's Mo. I just wanted to make it clear that you guys are talking about reaching people, but you guys are forgetting there's a certain thing called social media. I feel like everybody got a phone in here, so that might work out for y'all. Just a thought.
Just a thought. Post a pig tag.
Thank you.
You can click it right back up there.
Okay. Seeing no additional public comment, we are going to move to PCCEP voting to recommend to the mayor who we want to fill these seats. You see a ballot in front of you for seat 1 and seat 2, and then an alternate. We have 3 folks on the list, so please fill that out accordingly, and then Theo will come and pick these up, and we can tally them from there.
Can you explain how many votes they need to get?
You fill out the person you want in each seat. That's okay. And as we said earlier, there can be 2 youth in the 2 seats. You need not only have 1 youth.
They changed.
Do we have your guys' down here?
Okay, we're going to keep things moving. Theo's going to tally those votes up for us, and then we'll have a result for you shortly. The next order of business is a draft statement on the February 25th court hearing. Just so everybody knows, this is a status hearing on whether PCCEP should be granted permanent status. Our policy subcommittee has drafted a statement which we didn't have enough time to get up publicly. So what we're going to end up doing is taking comment from you all, from the community, on substantial compliance, and then using that to update our document, which we'll then put up for public comment. And then our next meeting is on February 25th in the evening after the status court hearing, at which point we will vote on the actual recommendation. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, who's going to talk a little bit through what our document currently says, and then we'll open it up for just general comments on either this document or thoughts on substantial compliance and what you have to say about that. So go ahead, Andrew.
Yes, thanks. So the document that we have, and again, it was not prepared in advance, so you don't all have it to look at, was written by Vadim, so thank you to Vadim for putting in the time on this. In short, what it does is it goes paragraph by paragraph through the PCCEP portion of the settlement agreement to highlight the things that we have done and the resources that the city has brought to bear on our behalf, and potentially some of the things that we wish we could have done or should have had at our disposal. Each paragraph we then make a statement about whether or not we believe that the city is in substantial compliance with that particular paragraph. The long and the short of it is that the document says that each of the paragraphs, again, this is for the PCCEP portion of the settlement agreement, that the city is in substantial compliance with each of those pieces. So that is, again, the approach that we are bringing to bear on this. Recognize that you don't see it now. In fact, many members of the committee haven't, which is why we're not voting on it or anything tonight. But happy to take public comment about how we should or could approach the February 25th meeting, given that we won't be seeing you all again at a full board meeting until after the hearing takes place.
I just have a sort of point of order question. Sure. We're going to be going before the judge on the 25th before this committee gets a chance to approve or amend this statement. So I'm wondering how we come to agreement as a board on what kind of statement we as a board are making if we're not actually voting on it.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the calendar is not our friend here. And so what we think that the best thing to do is just as we did last time, any PCCEP member who wants to go to the hearing and speak in their personal capacity as a PCCEP member about the issues before the court is, of course, welcome to do that. We will not have at that time, that morning, a statement on behalf of PCCEP that we can submit. Excuse me. But the idea is that by that evening, we might, if this committee votes to approve it, and then we will submit that statement to the court, even though it's after the hearing closes.
So would the court consider the statement even though it's after fact? Is that a possibility?
So I don't imagine that the court will make an immediate ruling on this. Do you have any sense on that, Jared, if we're expecting him to?
I'm not in the business of predicting what a federal judge would do.
Yeah, you are.
I will guarantee that you will consider anything you submit, and
yeah.
You can either have the Department of Justice, probably more appropriate to have the city attorney file it on your behalf, whatever statement you guys come up with. The COAP did so.
Okay, thank you.
I think that should probably be maybe in a port of order that we should maybe vote on, or something like that we would submit that to the district, to the city attorney. That way it would have a better chance of, as Jared said, getting to the judge.
I think that makes total sense, Steve. I think we can do that next month when we decide whether or not we're going to submit anything
okay.
In the first place. But yes, I absolutely agree. Glad you raised it.
Other PCCEP comment? Okay, we'll open it up to public comment. The microphone's over there. It can be on things you think we should say, thoughts on the settlement agreement. If you can, please make sure to say your name, the organization you're with, and stay within a 2-minute time frame just so we can hear from everybody and stay on schedule. That would be appreciated.
Hi, Dan Handelman again from Portland Cop Watch. First of all, procedurally speaking, my recommendation to you would be that the committee as a whole delegate the steering committee to be able to make a statement on behalf of the steering committee and say, we're not speaking for the whole group, but we are the steering committee and this is our position, and that way you at least have something on the record on the morning of in case the decision gets made that day, because otherwise you're missing a giant opportunity. Content-wise, you're talking about, do you believe that you're in substantial compliance? Last time, the judge was worried about affirming the structure that was given to you because he saw the COAB fall apart within 2 years of it being put together, and he didn't want to see that happen again. So I think your statement should say something about whether you think the structure is appropriate. And Portland Cop Watch continues to have some concerns about the structure, but I don't expect that to change based on our comments. The main thing I think that you need to consider at this juncture in your existence, at this hearing, especially because the DOJ and the COCL have said they think it's, the city's in full compliance, which means there's 1 year left after that statement is made, but before this whole thing goes away, is who is going to do the roles that the compliance officer and the DOJ are doing now. The report that the compliance officer put out reported that the Bureau was starting to train officers how to use knives, even though there's no policy on how to use, on whether you can even use a knife as a police officer. And the DOJ and COCL stopped them from doing it, according to their narrative. So the question is, who's going to do that? Those people are paid to go in there, and they're observing all the training hands-on. Is that something this committee is willing to take on? And if not, can you recommend some way for us to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen again? I mean, this is why we have to have outside oversight of our Bureau, and that outside oversight, it has the potential of going away in a year from now, as long as the city stays in full compliance. I'm going to put that in quote marks because we don't agree with that. So that, I mean, those are the things I think you really need to think about. Somebody from the media asked my opinion about the decision that the city's in full compliance. And I said, let's say that you had somebody who was in jail for assaulting other people, and they continued to assault other inmates while they were in there. And then the people who were running the jail were told, well, all you have to do is report on when they're assaulting somebody, make an investigation about whether the assault was appropriate or not, and then they can keep assaulting people as long as you track how many times that happens. And that's basically what we're having here with the agreement, that the city is tracking all the information, but we're still getting people in mental health crisis who are killed all the time. As much as there's a quote-unquote gun crisis in the city, almost everybody who was killed by the Portland police this year had a bladed weapon, not a gun.
Could I ask you, Dan, since you raised you said you didn't feel that the city was in substantial compliance about the Section 9 that has to do with the PCCEP, and I understand your overall concern that the outcomes aren't part of the agreement, but in terms of the actual wording of the agreement, if you think that there are any sections that the city has not complied with, because I think all of us on PCCEP would like to know, if you have that perspective.
Right. Well, for example, and tonight is sort of an exception to this problem, but they said that one of the paragraphs says that you have to be provided with the data, the stop data about demographics of people who are stopped in traffic and pedestrian stops. That has never happened at a public PCCEP. I've only missed one meeting, but I've never seen that happen in a public meeting. So they've handed it to you, and they checked the box, and that's good enough. But that's not really the point. The point is you should be discussing those. And again, I understand you're going to be talking about it kind of indirectly tonight, but there's no other committee in the city that's officially advising the Bureau that looks at those data. So that's really, to me, that's one of the most crucial things in the report. And then, similarly, and this isn't really a PCCP, but that same section about public engagement, the annual report that came out, they announced their meetings in the precincts that are required with 0 notice for one of them and with 1 day and 8 days notice for the other 2. And then we found out here at your meeting that they were going to city council 8 days after a meeting when that was going forward. And then the only reason the public had a chance to comment on the annual report at the city council meeting was because something else, the community engagement plan, was being considered, but otherwise the mayor would not have taken public input on the annual report. And again, the point is to engage the community and have these discussions, but the city's just checking the box and saying, well, we did the annual report presentations, but nobody's actually having a discussion about it. So that's it. Those are some examples.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm Peter Parks. I'm also with Portland Cop Watch, although my comments are my individual ones. I'm a resident of Overlook neighborhood. I work with houseless people and immigrants quite a bit. I would like to comment on the what we're calling the substantial compliance with the settlement. I can see that there is compliance in terms of, as Dan was talking about, in checking boxes and things, but in terms of outcomes, in terms of actually changing behavior of police and reducing the use of excessive force, reducing escalation, so actually doing de-escalation. I don't see that, and I think the community does not see that. And those are things that we need to do, and I hope that PCCEP will continue, that there will be a community-based group like this that we can come to, and that will be engaging the youth and people of color, as was already mentioned, getting this room filled with people like that, and actually where you can hear the community and change those outcomes so that the community will build the trust that both the chief and the mayor talked about that they would like to see. So that's really what I would like to see is not just substantial compliance in quotation marks, but real outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment on either substantial compliance or thoughts on the court hearing and PCCEP's direction on that? Any further PCCEP comment on that? Okay. Nobody. Okay, cool. So we will draft an updated recommendation, get that out to y'all, and we'll definitely take that into consideration about making a joint statement on behalf of the steering committee so that we can have something to say on that. We're going to do the results of the election, and then we're a little ahead of schedule, which is perfect because we got a lot to go through, so we'll take a 15-minute break after that. Very proud to say that both Taji and Jamari were appointed to our steering committee, to the PCCEP committee. We will work on figuring out the terms of that. I'm actually going to ask the city attorney, Tracy Reeve, to come up and just clarify what needs to be done in terms of training or other things of that nature for them to sit on the committee. And actually the microphone's over there. We don't actually have it up here. But just clarification, because I know there's questions about the Citizens Academy, ride-alongs, all of those things, which I have an opinion on, but I'll let you go.
Excuse me. I'm Tracy Reeve. I'm the Portland City Attorney, and the PCCEP plan was recently amended to make some slight changes. Basically, it still contemplates that the bulk of the training, which is training on the history of the settlement agreement and opportunity for the amicus, the Albino Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform, to give some historical perspective on the reasons that the DOJ came to town, and the Mental Health Alliance to give some perspective on the mental health aspects and the reason it was, the reason that the settlement agreement came into being. I will also participate and give some historical perspective and some overview of what the settlement agreement required. Mr. Hager and I have done that jointly in the past. The Bureau will give some information, so we'll try to schedule all of that at one time to make it easier for folks. And then the other thing contemplated is that the ride-along will occur. The Community Academy, which is the longer one day, I think it is a full day training at the Police Bureau, will be scheduled as soon as practicable, but the new members can be seated and vote and participate when they've done those other things, the ride-along and the sort of historical training about the settlement agreement. So the community academy does not have to happen before the new members can be seated and participate.
Great.
Okay. So just to clarify all that, they'll need to complete the training and the ride along prior to sitting on it, and they also need to be officially appointed by the mayor.
So we were waiting to file the report on precisely who will be appointed until you took your action. I will file that tomorrow morning once the mayor confirms, which he already had told us that he wants to appoint who the body recommended. So we'll be filing that tomorrow, and the city council will be considering and have the opportunity to confirm those appointments at the Wednesday, February 5th city council meeting,
February 5th.
a week from tomorrow.
Put that on your calendar, yeah.
Oh, get both of them. Okay, great. Thank you on that. So again, want to congratulate Jamari and Taji on your somewhat official confirmation to the committee. We're going to take a 15-minute break and be back at 7 o'clock.
Perfect. Yeah. Are you one of the co-chairs? Oh, okay, sweet. Yeah. Thank you so much. Wait, what's the agenda? Wait, figure it out. Hey, Marcy. Great. I need grandma. Yeah.
If you want to forward it to me, I can ask my director if she's able to help facilitate that. If you know somebody with organization.
Well, I just
and that could
recently sent this, so, and then some guy, this guy just gave me his card and said that he would connect me with somebody too.
Oh, okay.
So,
yeah, because we have, I work with OA every day. I meet with them every day.
Okay.
We work in every day. So, yeah. So, if you don't hear back, I can help with that.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if you're interested in distributing the survey, Donald will want you to let me know as well.
Okay.
Or send me an email and I can ship that out to you.
Okay.
That's necessary.
Well, meeting seems good. Not a lot of too much hostility. Not really any hostility compared to what we've had in the past.
Yeah, I think it's been like, and actually it's more diverse than it's been.
I know. And that.
Which, by the way, one of the people that commented on the two people being.
Oh, Jose. I know Jose.
Yeah, he was like, I feel really bad. I didn't realize that your mother was there.
Oh, yeah.
I was like,
Yeah. Yeah. My supervisor hired him to do a workshop at our PSU.
Oh, really?
So I know him through that. Yeah. Yeah. He apologized. I was like, I'm not offended easy.
Yeah. I mean, he was like, I feel really bad. I was like, just apologize. It was a mistake.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm sure she's fine.
I would have never made it in law enforcement if my feelings were hurt easy. So, where is Fadim today?
I'm not really sure, actually. Have you guys been continuing to meet on the weekends?
No, we switched our days to Monday at 4 to 5:15. So it's during the week now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I might try to attend a couple of them. I know Britt's starting to come to some of the work groups. I mean, Kaji's started to come to some of the work groups that I facilitate, and it's all interconnected.
Okay.
So I'm trying to attend some of those to kind of tie it all together in some way.
But yeah, I just wanted to try and fit it in my regular work day and not come on the weekends. Plus, I was traveling more, so I didn't want to cancel any of,
Yeah.
It was a holiday weekend in Bristol. We had a meeting on Monday, whatever that Monday was. I don't know if it was Veterans Day or some Monday, and Britt wanted to still have the meeting.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's fine, but I'm going to be out of town, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's hard. We're looking to really expand the new racial equity subcommittee group. I know there's so much overlap too, and oftentimes we have Jose will come to have a lot of youth that attend our meeting, and so there could be potential opportunity to overlap at times.
When do you guys meet?
We meet on the third Thursday at our 5 p.m. The date and time is fine, but I'm probably going to
So you might proxy vote for us?
Yeah.
It's not a super great schedule for people.
I wanted just to pass all.
Yeah.
Have to pay for parking and then it's like.
Yeah, it's whatever works for your group. It happens to work for our group since I live in Gresham.
It does work.
And then Britt lives out towards in southwest or whatever. So then PCCEP was in the middle of both of us. So that works. But
yeah, it's good if you're not having like too much community involvement. But if you're asking like a bunch of people,
yeah,
not really suitable. Yeah. So then applying like an equity lens to that, you're like, this is not particularly easy. So yeah, but I'll try to make it to the next one. When's the next one again?
They just changed. Claudia asked us to move the date because they're using the PCCEP office. So it's now Monday the 10th.
Okay.
I can't. I have no time limit on it. All right, it's good to see you.
You guys really are leaving. All right. See you.
Heading out?
All right, we're gonna get started with the second half of this.
Cynthia. Gomez.
Oh, prerequisite?
Drive safely.
I guess I'm respecting.
All righty. That's actually you.
All right, thanks everybody. The last two items on our agenda tonight are our recommendations, which we're excited to present and discuss with you all. The first one is about body cameras. As some of you recall, last year there was a proposal from the Race and Ethnicity and Other Subcommittee about body cameras. At the time, the recommendation centered around support for a pilot effort. Decision on that was not taken at the time, was not supported at the time, and now we have a new recommendation again on body cameras from the same committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Lakiana, who wrote this one, to describe what the recommendation entails.
Yeah, and I just want to also mention that this is a carryover from last meeting. We spent a substantial amount of time working through this recommendation. And so the version you're looking at now is worked through that. It's basically split up into two sections, recommendations and considerations. This is basically what I envision this as a guiding document for Portland Police Bureau and for the city as they're considering body cameras. This was feedback collected at a race equity subcommittee meeting in the summer, and a bunch of community conversations post that, including a session I was at a couple of weeks ago at hosted by Multnomah County with the DA's office and various other law enforcement agencies, some of which had body cameras like Gresham and some like PPB which do not. So that's what you're looking at here. It gives recommendations on the pilot project and how officers are selected, who's storing the data, recommending that the data be stored by an independent third party. Officers should make their reports before viewing body camera footage, discipline for officers who turn the cameras off, and making it ADA accessible along with other different abilities. And then as far as considerations, basically they're just things, the overall point that I put into this is that body cameras are about a 50-50 chance of being seen as a tool in the community, as seen as helpful, depending on how it's rolled out. The city right now is currently working on it. They're having a session on February 6th about body cameras. I'll be speaking at that session, but until there's an actual project that's laid out, it's really hard to say whether body cameras will be seen as useful. It depends on what PPB ultimately decides to do and how they go about doing it. And so this document is helping guide that process. So that's all I'll say about that. I don't want to go too much into it. As I said before, we had spent a substantial amount of time talking about it, but I'm still open to PCCEP comment and obviously public comment as well.
Terrific, thank you. We'll start with PCCEP. Folks, anybody have comments, questions, suggestions for Lakiana and others on this recommendation?
So thanks, Lakiana, for editing this and doing all the hard work on this. I have one question about the recommendations, which is that the number 2 on that list, the others seem like actual recommendations. PPB should be transparent, et cetera. But this one seems like questions rather than a recommendation. I'm wondering, is there a recommendation buried in there? And if not, can we turn it into a recommendation?
Give me a second, just look at it. Yeah, as Andrew's saying right now to me, 3 is really the recommendation, and 2 is honestly more of a consideration. So
can we move that?
yes.
Okay.
Yep. So what we'll do is we'll take 2, recommendation number 2, and put it in with the considerations. And 3 is more of the recommendation that we encourage them to store it independently. And we're going to get to public comment in a couple minutes here, just to let folks know. Thank you for that.
Sorry, I've there used to be a policy in the city of Portland after, I can't remember his name, Mike, Joe anybody anyway, that the city wouldn't film people, the police wouldn't film people outside of training. And it was, as I recall, it was maybe Mike Reese that signed that. I don't know. Anyway, it's been a long time. And I was hoping that maybe we could put something about, asking the question whether police should be filming people anyway.
Can you repeat that one more time for me, please?
I'm not sure police should be filming anybody. Makes me uncomfortable. It goes right along with the facial recognition software.
Maybe someone in PPB can speak to this, but they do have the dash cams up currently.
Oh yes, I understand that, and that makes me uncomfortable too. But
yeah.
Okay. I have one proposal. I agree with you that body cameras standing alone in a vacuum don't build trust. You have to have the procedures and the apparatus around the cameras. And even then, it's an outstanding question, but that really helps. Indeed, in your consideration section, you say body cameras can increase trust if implemented properly. Totally agree. So if we think that body cameras can increase trust if implemented properly, then I think it makes sense to say to the Bureau and the city that if you follow the recommendations that we've laid out, you should pilot, the body cameras. Particularly because we're talking about a pilot. I mean, the notion of a pilot is a sort of small scale effort to see if a project works. I think if they incorporate these recommendations, they at the very least should be able to go ahead with the pilot, and then if there are still problems that need to be addressed, still things that need to be changed, then the community and others can provide feedback to them before it goes broader than that. So that would be my recommendation for this. Change nothing other than to add one line saying, if these recommendations are acted upon in the affirmative, that PCCEP would support moving forward with the body camera pilot.
Yeah, we've had some discussion around that previously. My whole point is I want to see a pilot project or any project related to this before I even sign off on it. I think this can help guide it. And once PPB has that, they can present that to us and we could, sign off on it. But I in all honesty, and that's kind of how I shaped it, I don't think it's necessarily PPB or PCCEP's space to endorse or any certain project. I think it's just to help shape and guide it and leave that decision to them. So that's my thought on that. If folks feel that we should vote on that amendment, we can consider it. But that's my perspective on it.
I think what I heard Andrew saying, though, was that PCCEP would, if they adopt these regulations, support a pilot project, which it sounds like you're also are in agreement with, that there should be a pilot project.
I'm not necessarily sure. I think that depends on what they come up with. And when they take this document and they look at it, are they adopting all of these? Or like, we'll take this recommendation and like, now we have your approval for the project. And it's, I think, like I said, it's like buying a house without seeing it. And they're saying they're going to promise to build you and just put the money down right now. I want to see the house first, and then I'll put my money down.
could somebody, maybe the police department, kind of maybe just update us to where we are in this process? I mean, it's still a thought. It's still an idea. We got a new chief. Where are we?
The statement, if you couldn't hear, was that the money had been allocated by the council, but the Bureau has not moved ahead with the project yet. The project meaning the pilot of body cameras.
And that's another thing, and then we'll hear from Ross. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Oh.
Can I just make a comment? I mean, the only comment I have about this in general is that this is an enforcement strategy, and so I'm looking here that there's been $1.6 million set aside in the budget to cover something like this. And one of the themes that is consistently brought up at every meeting is a lack of resources for early prevention and why we end up here in the first place. And so this is a really expensive project, having been on committees overlooking the Gresham police implementation pilot. When we're talking about early intervention, we're investing a lot of money in suppression and enforcement efforts. Just want to note that.
Ross had I think, a point to make on the PPB question.
Ross Caldwell from Independent Police Review. My understanding is that City Council is going to hear in a work session on this on February 6th, and sometime down the road, probably a few months, they're going to vote whether or not they want to go forward with the pilot. And there is that money set aside that Ms. Perez just referred to, and I think if the money doesn't go to that pilot, it's going to be taken for something else. So I think that's what that decision will be.
So I can repeat that for him. Basically, what he said was that there's a hearing, a work session on the 6th, in which they'll figure a lot of this out, and then post that in the next 2 months. They'll make a vote on it and decide whether to use that money. And if it's not used for that, it could go to something else, as Marcia said. And I think that was the exact point I was going to raise. And what they decide to do and how that project comes out, I think will determine whether that $1 million is worth it. And I think there's a lot of things that they have to figure out on their end before we were to say we think they should go forward with it. And I'm not convinced even that we should spend that $1 million on that.
So you're, because I think the million, arguing about how to spend $1.6 million is a reasonable thing to do. It's $1.6 million. But what that signifies to me is that there are certain, there's a perspective out there that is, even if they follow the recommendations here, we shouldn't do it because it's $1.6 million that's better spent. I think you can make that argument, but I think that right now, it just strikes me as strange that we would make a series of recommendations, but then sort of not say one way or the other what we think about this if the recommendations were followed. It seems to me that it is logical that if the recommendations are followed that we think are critical to the success of the project, then we would support the project. If the recommendations are followed and even then we don't support it, then we should just not support it, right?
So what if there's something, so let's say they take all of these recommendations into consideration, but then there's other stipulations that we didn't agree with that are outside of this.
Mm-hmm.
But they said, well, we put all your considerations in, but then we also put 6 other things in here that you don't agree, that wouldn't agree with, that I don't know about right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm saying. Like we're talking about something hypothetical. These are help to guide it, and we can support and continue to support in the future. Okay, now PPB comes back in 2 months and said, we've taken into consideration this, we've had this work session on the 6th, and here's what we want to do. Then PCCEP can be in a position to be like, okay, here's how we can support. We could do this part of it. We could work with y'all on your pilot project, or do you think? I think there's ways to do around it, but I think just to say, go ahead and do a pilot project if you do these things, based off of not seeing anything else, I think is just not the best use of our time.
Okay.
I would just to clarify the sort of logical question that I think Andrew's asking, one could be let's say one is against body cameras, but then say, okay, it's not up to us whether there's body cameras. If they choose to have body cameras, this is a better way to have body cameras. So I think someone could be against body cameras and vote for this, knowing that we don't have control over that decision.
Thank you for that.
I think that we could change our mind. You know, we could say at this particular point with these particular conditions, we support body cameras. If they come back and say, well, you know, we'll turn them off whenever we want and we'll, you know, paint over them with nail polish or, you know, whatever, we have the right to say, well, that doesn't really meet our goals, so we're not going to support it anymore. So, yeah, I think that having an initial support is okay if that's what everybody votes for, but I could see withdrawing that support later.
Do we want to vote on putting that in here?
As the person bringing it up, I would love to have a vote, but before we get there, of course, we would want to hear from the public about what they think about that concept. So I'll defer judgment until after we hear from everybody. Any more PCCEP comment on the recommendation writ large before we turn to?
Yeah, I'm going to ask a clarifying question, just like Elliot. Are we proposing that the messaging go forward as it is, and that should the situation change and we decide later we don't like the outcomes of what we're seeing, we then pull it or reject what they're offering? I guess I don't fully understand why we'd move something forward to reject it later, I guess.
So I think there are two options. One is just voting on it as it's been written, which is here are the recommendations if you go forward with this. The alternative that I've proposed is if you follow these recommendations, we support the pilot. But even if we went forward with that second version, I think Patrick's absolutely right that, you know, if the city comes back and they follow our recommendations, but they're following them in the breach and they're doing all sorts of things that we find offensive to just and equitable policing, then we can say, no, we're not good with this anymore. We always reserve the right to change our mind in a deliberative way.
Plus, we should be looking at the pilot and evaluating as it goes along. Hey, is it meeting the goals that the purpose why the camera, the accountability, be able to actually see the events. You know, we could always look at the pilot and I'll judge it on its merits.
All right, let's turn to public comment. Thank you for your patience.
It was interesting. I'm Edward Jones, and while I've never been a law enforcement officer, I've spent the last 40 years reading police reports. And so I wanted to speak briefly about why those reports need to happen in a way that's not prescribed here. And I'm speaking to point 4. Officers should write their police reports before viewing any body camera footage. That's dumb. Otherwise, this is a great document. That's a problem. Here's the thing. 20 years as a criminal defense lawyer, 20 years as a trial court judge. So I've read a lot of police reports. Everybody downstream in the criminal justice system reads those reports. They need to be as right as they can be. And if the officer needs to play the tape to hear the right words or know where the guy was standing or whatever to get that report as accurate as it can be, that's what needs to happen. It's not a trap for police officers. That's just unbelievably pointless and wrong-headed in my view. Those cameras can improve the quality of the reports that we get. That will improve the quality of the decisions that the defendants and the lawyers and the judges make about the cases, and that will improve the quality of justice. Now, there's a lot of other problems in the system. I've been there, I know. But inaccurate police reports are not a solution to any of them.
Could I ask a question? Would you also support defendants of an alleged crime being able to view that body camera before they make
The law
their statement.
requires it now.
Oh, so before they make any statement, they're
Yeah, I mean, the way our laws are written now, if they took pictures of you committing the crime or getting arrested, you got a right to them. Your lawyer gets them.
But before they make a statement to the police?
Well, of course not.
Well, that's, I think this is precisely the issue, is not whether you get access to them, but the timing of the access. And the concern that the police report would be tailored to what is shown or not shown would be this.
Shouldn't it be consistent with the video?
Well, as the defendant, as a defendant of an alleged crime, their statement should also be consistent. But I think it's not shown because we're assessing the veracity of the statement.
When the defendant gets offered a chance to tell his story, he gets read his rights, and if he would say, I don't want to talk to you now, I'll wait till I see the video and talk to my lawyer about it, he has a perfect right to do that. He never does that, does he? No, he talks. I mean, there it is. And the idea that the officer is going to play the video for him and then interview him, that's not going to happen. We need accurate reports. The video is a great idea. Now I get, you see police reports that have appended audio transcript, Oh yeah, I interviewed X and he told me basically this, but if you want the details, play the tape. Now, personally, I think that's kind of sloppy, but that's how it works. And then when the defense lawyer or the DA or the judge, if there's a question, you play the tape. And that video goes along in the same fashion. But no one's going to watch them all over again, except for the defense lawyer who's kind of obligated to do it in each case. And there's going to be some costs associated with that, too, we should keep in mind. But it is going to improve the quality of the evidence and the outcomes. So having the officers try to trick them into saying something wrong, which is in effect what that provision in these rules says, it doesn't make any sense. It
Very
will
good.
undermine the quality of justice.
We appreciate that comment.
Excuse me, I have one question. Sure. When an officer offers you your Miranda rights and says, do you have anything to say? There's a history around, do you have anything to say? And they say, no, I want to speak to my lawyer. Well, do you have anything else you want to say? So I get that, that we may gotcha the officer, but there's all sorts of gotchas for the defendant as well. So I am not seeing how one gotcha against the police is somehow gonna, is somehow a bad thing.
Well, it's a bad thing because in 9,999 cases out of every 10,000 cases, there aren't going to be issues about why he shot the guy. There's just going to be issues about what actually happened, and we're going to sort it out. But the better evidence on the table and the more accurate the reports, the better the results are going to be. That's all.
I was told at one point that the last time a Portland police officer was stood trial for a capital crime, they were called troopers, and it was before I was born. So I'm not sure we have to worry much about that happening.
Well, and that's right, another argument for just getting the reports done accurately.
Thank you. Just a reminder, we welcome disagreement here. I think we can do it without calling each other dumb or using other words like that. So let's just try to keep that in mind. But thank you for the comment. Mr. Sachs.
Hello, my name is Sam Sachs. I'm a community member. Also proud to say I was a founding member of PCCEP. I want to give some history to this recommendation. This recommendation was actually brought forward about a year ago by myself, and the initial recommendation was for the PCCEP to vote on supporting the use of body cams, a pilot project. And I want to emphasize it's a pilot project. It's not permanent. I think that in some cases you're finding a problem to the solution. This is a solution for our community. I've grown up here. I was born here. I worked in for the sheriff's office for 7 years as a park ranger, been in law enforcement and public safety. So I know the importance of having body cams on police officers, not only for police officers, but for community members. We don't have recorded evidence of the use of deadly force that have happened in this city that I know of from body cams. So when we talk about transparency, whether it's this group or in the community, and accountability, this is the very tool that you have to give you both of those. This committee is tasked with hearing the community's voice. They've brought to you, myself, Marcia, and Lakiana, had meetings with community members, and we heard their concerns, and those concerns are in here. They came to us and they voiced their concerns, what they wanted to see. Some of them were for, some are against. Your responsibility is to take that, to hear those voices, and then put it to action, to give those voices legs, to put it to action. And again, it's a pilot project. It's not permanent. We had an opportunity with the letter of condolences. We had an opportunity to hear the voices from the community and say, we need this, we want this. That was an aha moment for me because I felt like this is the right thing to do. This is what the community wants. As a committee member, whether my personal opinion aside, this is our opportunity to move to action. I also want to touch on the fact that a lot of the research that's been quoted says that it doesn't change behavior for police officers. I don't know what that behavior is, good or bad. It's not said, but that's also assuming, some people are assuming that that behavior is bad, and it doesn't change bad behavior. But the majority of officers I've been around, it doesn't change their behavior because they're doing the right thing in the first place. What it does say, and the sheriff or the police chief in Washington, D.C. said, the one thing it does do is build trust. And that's what this is about. I think you should move forward with the recommendations as is. But your recommendation can have power, it can have responsibility, it can have an effect for you to say, as the committee here, to say to the Portland Police, to the city, to the Portland Police Association, we support a pilot project as long as we have a seat at the table and we are involved with the forming of the policies, and only if these recommendations are considered in those policies. Otherwise, they could just move forward and have a pilot project and say, yeah, well, these are great, but we don't really have to consider them. You know, we can or we can't. So I think it's important for you. I think this is an opportunity, a real important opportunity at this juncture for our city, for our community, for my friends of color in this community to feel safe. So when they get pulled over by a police officer and they have a body cam on, they know that the officer has a body cam. They know, maybe it won't make them feel any safer, but they'll know that they're being recorded. And the officer as well. I don't want to see miss an opportunity. It's a pilot project. And I would also say about the funding, $1.6 million, how much is a life worth? My life's worth more than $1.6 million. So don't let budget get in your way. I don't want to take any questions or comments. You can do that offline or email me, but I think it's an opportunity for you to say you support these recommendations, you support moving forward with a pilot project only if they consider these recommendations. And then if they don't, you have a lot of weight to say they're not listening to us. They're not listening to the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Mr. Handelman?
Hello, Dan Handelman again with Portland Cop Watch. And I said some of these comments last month, but I'm going to repeat some of them because I think it's worth it. Well, and the first one was a typo that didn't get fixed. In considerations, section 3, you're talking about Portland State University Police, not Portland State Police or the state police from Oregon who would be in Portland. So that you should prepare that.
What is it supposed to be?
Should be Portland State University Police, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we, as Portland Cop Watch, came up with the position that we are neutral about body cameras, and sounds like it would be a wise position for this body to adopt as well. And it seems like that's what you would be if you adopt this the way it's written. Because we know there's people in the community that think that body cameras are going to help a lot, and we also know that there are people who know that they're going to be used mostly to prosecute people, especially people of color. They're going to be used to spy on activists. They're going to be used for all sorts of improper reasons that we don't encourage. We also know that body cameras point outward from the officer, so you don't see the officer. That's why we encourage people to cop watch, so that other third party has a camera on the cop, not the cop having a camera on the community. So, I know it sounds like we're against them, but our official position is that we're neutral. So there's a couple of things that are in our recommendations about body cameras, which we made despite the fact that we're not neutral on them, that I mentioned last month. One of them is addressed kind of in your other recommendation. We said that police must inform community members they're being recorded, inform them of their right to remain silent, the right not to make incriminating statements, and the right to walk away if applicable. That would tie in with that other recommendation that you're making, but I think when the body camera is running, that's very helpful for you not to say something that could be used against you in a court of law. We also made a recommendation that police can't use footage to gather people's lawful activity in violation of state law, ORS 181A 250, that prohibits collection or maintenance of any information about people's social, political, or religious affiliations unless there's suspicion of criminal conduct. So when officers come to, right now, they've used some body cameras at political protests, and they're recording what you're doing, who's at a political protest, and they're not violating any law. That's against state law. But they give them to the city attorney and then say, oh, well, we're not maintaining it because we gave it to the city attorney. That's garbage. I mean, they collected it, and the city's the same entity as the police. So that's the second thing. The third one is probably the most important one. Maybe it's the overarching statement that might be made. We said footage should primarily be used to hold police accountable for officer misconduct and criminal activity and to improve training and policy. And we're saying there is that it should not be primarily used to convict people for criminal activity that might be caught on the body cameras. That's the opposite of why we're supposed to be building trust, right, with the community. The other issue about funding is that the $1.6 million is to buy the cameras and have 1 year's worth of something, but then you have to maintain it. You have to make sure that somebody's looking at the files. When somebody asks for you to retrieve one of them, you have to pay them, and there's an ongoing cost that's going to, kind of balloon into the future. So that's just another issue to think about. So I suggest that you adopt this without saying whether you're for or against the cameras. Just say these are the recommendations that we put forward, and then if they adopt them, hopefully they'll at least agree with what you're saying.
Thank you. Any additional public comment on this? Yeah. Yes, indeed. We have not gone back in our time capsule. It is, in fact, the 28th of January 2020, so we will update that. Thank you. Good catch. Okay. I'm the one sort of moving for us to include something about promoting body cameras. I would like to vote on including that, and then if we vote that down, with that included, we can vote on the original if you're okay with that.
Yep. So just to be clear, it'd be an amendment to basically endorse body cameras, which you just add that the city hasn't done that yet. So there is no real project we're endorsing. We're just endorsing the idea of it. But there is no.
Andrew, could you just say the sentence?
Sure.
You want to add?
So I think the easiest way to describe what I'm proposing is, so in the summary of the recommendation, we say that PCCEP encourages PPB to take into consideration the following recommendations when considering body cameras in any potential pilot projects. I would strike the next sentence. The recommendation is not an endorsement, one way or the other. And the final sentence of that paragraph would read, PCCEP offers these recommendations as guidance in shaping body-worn camera policies. Should these recommendations be agreed to by the Police Bureau, PCCEP would support a pilot of the body camera program. I'll just repeat that. So should these recommendations be approved by the Police Bureau, PCCEP would support a pilot of the body camera program.
All of these recommendations, or?
Yes, these recommendations. If you want to put all in there, sure. So that's the proposal I have on the table. There are also a couple of things that were mentioned earlier. Again, we'll fix the date. We'll add in university, so it's clear we're talking about PSU police, and we will move recommendation, what is currently recommendation 2, into the considerations, because that is more of a sort of argument about why we should be recommending what we recommend. Okay. All right. Let's vote on this. And again, if we vote this down, we'll go back.
No, just so we're voting on a friendly amendment first.
That's right.
In addition to the recommendation. So we'll vote on that, and then pass or fail, we'll vote on the actual recommendation.
Great.
Is it a friendly amendment? I guess you guys have to decide.
I don't know. It's an amendment, friendly or not. I'll take it as friendly.
Thank you, Lakiata.
Yes, but it's a proposed amendment to the recommendation, and it's basically, it says, should all these recommendations be approved, PCCEP approves body cameras.
Supports the body camera pilot.
Yes.
Yep. All right. Yeah, we don't use Robert's Rules of Order, but out of an abundance of caution, does anyone want to second this proposal?
I just have to cut in real quick on even adding the amendment. I just feel like at this point in time, since there's no pilot happening and nothing going on, that we should reserve that for maybe an amendment later and just kind of move this along as it is, because like you said, there isn't even a pilot project happening anytime in the near future. So, and the fact you said all the recommendations, I would say the ones appropriate for the pilot, rather than all or nothing thinking. I would make the recommendation be, if they choose the recommendations that make the pilot more successful, pick one. Okay, I'm happy with one that works rather than all of them. So I just want to get a little clarity around some of my thinking around the all or nothing thinking. It doesn't leave room for expansion in my mind. Yeah. If they come up with something better that we could look at and kind of modify our idea with their idea, all or nothing to me limits that ability to look at something deeper, I guess.
And again, I'm seconding the thought of approving a pilot project that doesn't exist.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, why don't we just vote on it and see where we
let
go?
it go.
Okay, well, let's go with the amendment. I'll turn it over.
All right. Voting on the amendment, we'll start down the left side of the table with Amy.
The amendment that reads all inclusive of these recommendations?
Correct,
Or
again.
the ones that best apply?
All.
No, all. The amendment would say that if the police bureau
Okay,
and
I'll vote
all-
yay.
No.
I'll vote yes.
No.
No.
Yay.
No.
So why do we even?
No.
No.
All right, noes have it. So we can move on to voting on the recommendation as it appeared in its first blush with the amendments that we mentioned earlier. Again, PSU, moving number 2 to considerations, and fixing the date. So we'll vote on this again, starting down with Amy.
I vote yes
I
on
vote
correction.
yes.
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 No.
Okay. It passes 6-1. We will make the relevant edits and get it.
Britt left early, but Britt also voted yes on this recommendation. I don't know if that is technicality.
Yeah, we can't vote by proxy, unfortunately. But
Oh, there wasn't it.
you're right, 7-1. Okay, so we'll get this to the city after we clean it up. Thanks, everybody. Next up is procedural justice statement policy recommendation. This is coming to us from the race ethnicity subcommittee. I don't know. I think Lakiani, you want to present this one? It's on the table in the back if anybody hasn't seen it. But take it away.
Yeah, so really excited about this recommendation. I think it's the first, one of the first policy recommendations coming out of PCCEP. As Marcia had earlier talked about, we had a conversation at our racial equity subcommittee meeting and talked with Mary Claire of Portland Police Bureau about how a policy would actually be kind of adopted by Portland Police Bureau if it passed. So just for clarification to the committee and to the community members, this would be a policy proposal that I'm going to present right now. It's not in and of its final form, but it would be the framework. If it was passed, it would then go to the the Portland Police Bureau, and it would go through their universal review process, which would be basically a work group would be formed. We would have some policy experts, PPB policy team, PCCEP members, and whatnot, and they would actually make the actual policy based off of this, and then it would go through 2 universal review processes where it would go before public and Portland Police Bureau comment before finally being signed as an official policy. So that's how that would work. So what's presented today is a framework for it. So even if we pass it today, this doesn't necessarily mean that this would be the final version of it. I want to start by sharing a story of that happened this past weekend with me that kind of frames the need for this policy. I want to start by saying the officer involved in it was not a Portland Police Bureau officer. It was from a different agency, but it was Sunday evening, and one of my students FaceTimed me while he was in the middle of being pulled over by the police. And he wanted me to stay on the line with him while he was being pulled over because he feared for his safety. And I was able to listen in on the conversation, and the officer, as soon as he started recording it, said, "You're turning this into a sideshow, and you should just turn that thing off," and was very agitated with the youth. And so as we were listening to the conversation and things of that nature, he was telling me that the officer hadn't introduced himself and that there's just a real sense of fear. This was a person of color. The incident thankfully ended without a ticket. He had been speeding, and he was able to go about his way. But there was a couple things in there. The officer was agitated that he began recording the incident when it was for him a matter of personal safety and something that he felt comfortable with as someone that we had a relationship with, and also the fact that the officer didn't introduce himself and didn't really follow those what would be considered normal things as you're, especially in that kind of position, just proper procedures. So this recommendation is a first of its kind. I don't know if it exists anywhere else, but it's a recommendation that me and Marcia had kind of thought up. But it would basically help bring more voice and justice into those conversations. And basically what it would do is each time that there's a stop or a search with a Portland Police Bureau officer, they would give out 5 pieces of information. First of all, their first and last name as soon as the conversation starts. I know that there's currently a policy in place that they're supposed to do that, but this would really make sure that happens, that I know who I'm speaking with. Their badge number. Again, like we were saying in that call, and sometimes a lot of times if you start asking an officer, "What's your name? What's your badge number?" it can escalate the conversation. So that takes the burden off of the community member to be like, "I have to ask that." It's just automatically given to you. The reason you're stopped. Again, that seems basic, but a lot of times people are not told why they're being stopped. In this case, I did observe the officer say you're being stopped for X, Y, and Z because it was a traffic stop. But again, these are stops could be I'm approaching you on the street, and there is no real reason why I'm stopped. So that would allow that person to know. A lot of times when an officer comes up to you, they say, "Do you know why I stopped you?" To me, that's a backwards question because you're already asking me to incriminate myself. You should just let me know why you stopped me, and we can start from there. A lot of times, especially in pedestrian stops, someone is detained, but they're not really sure if they're free to go or if they're actually being detained for a reason. And so this and I understand that police officers, there is a sense of, it is a tool a lot of times to try and investigate things. If I can hold you for a few seconds and you don't know if you're being detained or not, and I can start asking you questions. You see this a lot of times with youth, that they're stopped by somebody and they're just like, well, this is a person in authority. They have weapons on them. I'm just going to stay here, when in all actuality, they have the ability to walk away. And so we are asking officers to give up some of that power that's held with people not knowing by saying, are you being detained or are you free to go? And letting that person know, and then they can voluntarily engage in that conversation or not. And then the fifth piece, which is also really important, and it ties back to this conversation, the officer will then ask, is there any reasonable accommodation that I can make to you to make you feel more safe during this stop? And if that request is, I would like to FaceTime my mentor or my teacher, or I would like to take a seat because I have trouble standing for long periods of time, or I would like you to step back slightly, or I get very anxious when someone raises their voice, or if you could write down the things so that I could see them. This allows the person to feel more comfortable. We heard at another PCCEP meeting that someone didn't like to be touched, and so when they were engaging them, the person was touched, and the person reacted how they did. So this recommendation, I believe, would radically change the interactions at stops and searches with community members by laying out everything about the stop, from the name of the person, who they're being stopped by, to the reason, and if it's voluntary or not. PPB under Chief Outlaw, and I would imagine so under Chief Resch, has championed procedural justice. They've created a whole training around it. And so this recommendation would put that into practice, would give officers an actual opportunity to do it rather than just in a scenario. In these scenarios, they're evaluated after the scenario's done. They do a training. So there's two things that PPB has procedural justice. They put it in all layers of their trainings now. So even under the trainings that aren't specifically titled procedural justice, there's still a procedural justice framework put into it. But in the procedural justice training, after it, they're evaluated on whether they did it right. But there's no evaluation of, does it actually happen in the community, and how are we measuring that? How are we measuring the effectiveness of procedural justice, which is one of the things that was laid out in the settlement agreement, this training. So what we're asking as part of this recommendation is that they use context surveys that they've begun to use as baseline data to measure procedural justice and get some feedback, because there's no real way to say, how fair do you feel officers are? How much do you feel like they're listening to you, and things of that nature. So in addition to reading the statement, this recommendation calls for that data to be collected. So this would also involve a pilot project. So once this recommendation was put into place, this policy was put into place, there would be a pilot project where they would take a precinct and they would roll this out, and they would go through it for a number of months where they could collect data and see how it was working, see how community members were responding to it. And yeah, I think that basically does it. There's a fifth piece in here to collect traffic stop data. A lot of major police bureaus around the country, including the New York Police Department, use it. It was a recommendation given by Andrew and Elliot that they would, collect that data so we can have more information on it. We had this recommendation went twice through racial equity subcommittee meetings. I met with I'm blanking on her name, but she was Officer Hurley, Captain Hurley. I think she now was just she was just promoted in the shuffle of leadership at PPB, but she was over the training division, and we met and talked about the procedural justice trainings that they do and how they're rolling it out. So I've had a number of different looks and involvement from folks in helping shape this recommendation, and we'll open it up to public comment. Excuse me.
Yes.
There's a couple things I'd like to see changed. You mentioned the card that they're required to give you if you ask for it down in Section 4. I think it would be really great if we mentioned that in the content as well, that we would like the officer to automatically give a card. I know it would drive up the cost of cards for you guys, and I'm sorry about that, but it would be great if they automatically gave that card, at which point it would solve the first two on the on your information that you asked for on the second page. And also, Steve and I were talking about the fact that the badge numbers, I don't think they have badge numbers. I think they have DPSST numbers. So that might be a change that you might want to make. And also on number 5, collect traffic stop data. I think we're given traffic stop data, aren't we?
We collect the data, but we don't currently collect, although the Bureau is looking into collecting the investigative purpose for the traffic stop. So that's the important piece that's missing.
Quick response, just so we keep up with it. Agree with both of those recommendations.
I just want to note, too, that obviously I'm a proponent of this, having worked on this with you, Lakiana, and thank you for all the work. I can't take credit for all of this. I did not write this up. There's nothing I did here except for probably write my name and give many opinions. And so thank you for all the work that you put into this and all the passion. I heard the chief earlier talk about what we can do and how we can help support the community. What we're trying to do in the Racial Equity Subcommittee is really bring the voices of the community, especially marginalized communities, that are impacted by some of these practices that are currently in place by the Bureau, and bring that voice to the table. And so we were asked I think she said something about how we can help reduce the gun violence. We know that gun violence is at a spike in this city right now. And we also know that if people perceive that they're being treated fairly and justly, that they're more likely to follow the law. And if they believe that the law is being enforced fairly and justly, their compliance increases. And so this is a direct reflection of increasing trust with the community. And I just want to make sure that folks know that we put a lot of thought into this, and this is the kind of thing that is a direct correlation to reducing some of the violence that we're seeing in the city over time.
Thank you, Marcia. Sure, go ahead, Amy.
As you guys were talking about what you plan on doing, in my mind, I kept going back to when I was at the training with the police department, and we were doing stops. You know, and the one stop episode where the person was trying to be really nice and courteous, and the next thing you know, the other person pulls a gun out and shoots him. So I guess in my mind, that's really kind of hard to forget, is that every single stop is a potential risk to life and limb. And maybe we could do it like through the microphone kind of thing they have on their cars and say, this is Officer so-and-so, I'm pulling you over because, and at least preface the reason for pulling them over through a safer method. I just, in my mind, envision police officers trying to get close to a car to have these personal conversations, and the next thing you know, a gun coming out from under the seat, and boom, they've been shot. So I guess in my head, I want to put safety on both sides. Safety for the individuals in the car and safety for the police officers that have to answer the call. Because it could be a stolen car, there could be drugs in there. We don't have any idea why they're being pulled over. But the officers seem to feel like it was necessary. They need to announce it. If they announced it over the airwaves and said, this is Officer so-and-so, I am pulling you over because your taillight's out or whatever, it would give the person in the car a chance to know who the officer was and yet somehow keep everyone safe. So I guess in my mind, an individual showing up at your window, to me, is kind of risky. At this point in our community, to me, it's very risky for an officer to come out of the car and spend, 3 to 5 minutes explaining who he is, their badge number, why they stopped you, and blah, 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 when their whole goal is to make sure that everybody's safe in the situation. So I guess I want to see some reference to maybe some of that clarity and making sure that it's to be done safely on both sides, so nobody gets hurt.
Sorry. I'm not sure that it's any more dangerous than it already is for a police officer to have to talk to somebody. it actually is a de-escalation tactic to talk to someone. So I'm not sure I see your
Okay.
point on that. And yeah.
Okay.
But to the point of this, I could see a safety concern with number 5 for police officers. I really could. I watched a video of an officer being shot and killed, and for 5 minutes they shot the breeze like best friends. And all of a sudden, when the officer just said, "Hey, you mind if I just look at your car?" Because there's just so much, and that guy pulled a gun and shot him, killed him. So I want to hear from the police about any with number 5. I get the reason for 5.
You're talking about the reasonable accommodation.
Yes, a reasonable accommodation, absolutely. But I also just like if people could take that as a opportunity, like how does the officer do that and still preserve his personal safety? I don't know if one of the officers in the room want to speak to that matter. But to Amy's point, I've seen a lot of officers shot.
I also want to add that this is a policy concept and framework and not the actual policy. So one of the things that I appreciated that came out of the racial equity subcommittee meeting that we had when we spoke with Mary Claire is talking about who in the division would be able to inform a future policy and who in the division would be able to inform the safety ramifications of each of the pieces that are that are implied in this concept or in this
Right.
framework. And so the hope is that if this is adopted, that we would work with a team of Portland Police Bureau experts within their division, within their, we're not policymakers. So I think that was the big aha moment that we had in our meeting was that we don't develop policies, but we can make recommendations to develop one collaboratively with all these things in consideration, with all of the union considerations, the policies and practices that are already in place that need to be either considered, updated, amended, and whatever that looks like. So,
Thank you. One more thing to add to your comment, Amy, which I think is an important one to consider. There's maybe a simple way to add a couple of words to this, just to make clear that we are acknowledging the fact that there are certain exigent circumstances that might preclude an officer from doing this. I think you can imagine many circumstances in which it would not be feasible for an officer to provide first and last name, badge number, et cetera. Just again, think of the active shooter situation. So we could say, knowing that a lot of these details will be worked out in the policy process, that the procedural justice statement policy requires officers to state the following information, barring exigent circumstances or something simple like that.
It's in there.
Okay.
Where do we put it in here? We recommend, at a minimum, this statement should be verbally given during vehicle or pedestrian stops or searches where no crime is in progress, no weapons are visible, and when or where use of force is not necessary upon engagement or any instance that would impair performance of duty as outlined in PPP Directives Manual Identification Policy 312.50, which already states, it lays out a little bit of language of, when it's an identification policy and it says introduce yourself except when, yeah.
All right,
I think you're missing a not, because what you read is not what's written here. No weapons are visible or where use of force is necessary upon engagement.
Yeah.
You mean not necessary?
Not necessary.
Oh, you need to put the not in there.
Wait, let me read it again.
Not necessary.
It should be verbally given when use of force is not necessary.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you for pointing that out and explaining it to me.
Yeah, and it's actually noted in the first part too. Under the summary of the recommendation or timing, it says the statement should be made at the beginning of the officer's stop and or search, or as soon as thereafter as feasible under the circumstances.
I want to just speak in favor of this proposal. There's a lot of other things that I think are I would add to it in a policy, but I understand this is a framework. I see nothing in here that says what happens if an officer under these conditions does not actually do this, so disciplinary procedures. But I think the idea that this is a framework that those details will be worked out makes me comfortable with what's here.
Any other committee comment before we turn to the public? Very good. Any public comment?
Hi, I think you know me. My name is Dan Handelman. I'm with Portland Cop Watch. This is very excellent starting point for a policy like this. We do trainings for community members about what their rights are when they're stopped by the police all the time. And some of the discussion that happened before, where you were having the discussion about how people who are suspects don't necessarily know that they have the right to remain silent, even though you hear it on TV all the time. People don't think about that. This kind of covers some of these issues so that we don't have to train everybody in the community what their rights are, so the police can kind of give that training at the stop. So I really appreciate how that's written in that way. One of the things that might make the police more open to doing this is another thing that's in our first paragraph of our Your Rights card, where the officer might say, I'm just going to, before they ask them if there's a reasonable accommodation they can make for the person being stopped, and say, just for my safety, I'm going to ask you to keep your hands visible the whole time I'm talking with you. Right? Because that's one of the things people don't think about. As soon as you put your hands away, the cop thinks you're going for a weapon. So maybe they have the opportunity to offer, this is what I need you to do for me. What can I do for you? And then that way, they get a little more training in there. The last part of that sentence that you all just read about the exceptions or the times when the statement should be verbally given, about an instance that would impair performance or duty, that should be except any instance that would impair, I believe, right? So I think another word is missing in there. Yeah, and I had to ask Mr. Young during your break, I think it was, why you were asking for them to collect traffic stop data, because they are already. So I think it should say collect the reasons for traffic stops, or data on the reason for traffic stops. And this is very important that you're highlighting this. If you look back at the PPB's existing reports, I think in 2015 was the last time they published, and they said equipment failure was a reason for pulling people, or like a broken taillight. That line item disappeared from the reports, and we've been asking Chief Outlaw to put it back in for 2 years. It hasn't gone back in, and so I'm hoping that maybe your recommendation will prompt them to also see what the reasons are that people are being pulled over, because a lot of times it's a pretext stop, and we know that's a pretext stop. But thank you very much for this recommendation.
Thank you.
Yeah, click just, yeah, there's like some other words used, but I can't remember it.
Thank you, Mr. Handelman. Any other public comment? I know we have members of the Bureau here. I don't know if you have any sort of perspective that you want to share on this, either from the experience of what it's like to be an officer in these circumstances, or otherwise that would help us as we think through this issue or this policy. But certainly invite that. Okay.
Okay, so going to try and review the changes that were suggested. So we've got, can you read the accept one? I was a little confused.
Sure. So we're just cleaning up typos in this. This is the first full paragraph on page 2 in the explanation of the recommendation. So the bottom of that paragraph will now read, at the minimum, this statement should be verbally given during vehicle or pedestrian stops or searches where no crime is in progress, no weapons are visible, and or where the use of force is not necessary upon engagement, or except in any instance that would impair performance of duty as outlined in the PPB Directives Manual.
Yeah. Noted.
Then in the 1 through 5, two suggested changes from Patrick, eliminating badge and putting in identification. Is it DPSST? What is
DPSST.
DPSST.
and what is for my own edification? What is that?
And probably most everybody else.
It's their they're given a number as a peace officer for the state of Oregon, which is really what their rank is, and so it's a number. There's no badge number on a Portland police badge.
The
Safety. Yeah.
The Department of Public Safety Standards and Training. Thank you very much.
Number.
Acronym City.
Yep.
So we'll change that, and in addition, we'll add giving the card. Patrick's recommendation.
The suggestion, I want to throw in the suggestion about asking Dan, your recommendation about asking people to keep their hands present. Could you just give us the language that you would suggest there for that?
So if you are agreeing to put this in, I would say in number 5, after requesting the person keep their hands visible for officer safety, the officer asks if there's any reasonable accommodation the officer can do to make the individual feel safer during the stop.
Okay. I'll type something up for that, but it'll be right along those lines.
Lakiana, something just crossed my mind. How do we determine, like, if an individual is deaf and they can't hear you and they can't, you know what I mean? Like, where's the provision for ADA, like, type stuff where the individual has a driver's license, but they're deaf or they have other conditions that we need to somehow be more trauma informed with? How do people do it now? Is there something on the car that tells you?
Yeah. Can you
How do you all handle that?
Difference in our
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
Can you actually come to the microphone just so we can pick it up on live stream? How do officers approach or communicate with folks that are deaf or
Speak a different language.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a reasonable accommodation on our end. Normally, we'll have a notebook too, so we can write things down, or we can figure out kind of license registration pieces. I think it's the questions that you might have to ask for follow-up or things of that nature that get a little tougher. But we have language line, interpretive services that we can utilize too. Cell phones now make it a little easier to kind of do translation or type things back and forth. I think generally during a traffic stop, you can get your basic information that you need. And people who have a driver's license or in a car generally know what you would be asking for as an officer when you come to the window. So that part's kind of easier to figure out. It's just kind of the nuanced things if you need to communicate past that becomes tricky. And I would say in general too, that everything you do when you're an officer and you walk up to the window is about you being safe and the person in the car being and feeling safe too. Because the last thing you want is someone in the car who feels agitated or like they don't want to be there or want to drive away or do something. So a lot of your actions are there to just convey information or over-convey information. Like I always ask people, where is your license? Where do you keep it? In there, okay, you can reach for it. It's usually over-communicate to keep people safe and to keep you safe too.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Oh, could I add one more thing, which is a suggestion from Dan on
and actually, can I just finish Amy's point? I think we should add something in there that some kind of either card or something should be given to folks that cannot verbally hear this statement. And I'll throw that in there too. And we had been brought up, as Marcia said, in our meeting.
So in the explanation of the recommendation, this is the second to last page, point 5. Instead of collect traffic stop data, we could say collect data on investigative purpose for traffic stop, which is really the item that's currently not collected. So just be more specific.
Yep, so it would say collect
collect data on investigative purpose of traffic stop, which I think the Bureau is going to do, right? Mary Claire? They're looking into it. Right, okay.
Okay. With those edits and amendments included, we should proceed to vote on this. So we will start, I guess, to switch it up, we'll start on the right side as we are looking toward you, and that's with Patrick.
No, I don't want to vote first. Yes.
I'll vote first, say yes.
No, yes, I'll vote yes.
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 All right, motion, recommendation passes unanimously. Congrats to Lakiana and Marcia, and thank you very much for leading on this. That concludes our agenda 15 minutes early. And so we will have another very interesting meeting for you next month at the end of the month, but we also have a jam-packed agenda of subcommittees this month, including a presentation by the compliance officer, which will be taking place at the Settlement Agreement and Policy Subcommittee the second week of the month. You can get more information about that on the PCCEP website, but just to let you know in advance. Thank you again for coming out, and have a safe evening.